Can you give me an example of one way that people do business? Like, would they form a corporation? Very good. Or partnership. Very good. Those are two. Okay, so let's put those two down. Okay, we have partnership. And we have corporation. Let's put corporation here. Can anybody tell me another way that people do business besides partnership or corporation?
Sole proprietorship.
Sole proprietorship. That's a good one. Sole proprietorship. Any others? There is another one called limited liability company. So let's put that right here. Also called an LLC. Can anybody tell me if they know of any different types of partnerships or corporations? Yes?
Limited partnership, and general.
Yes, okay, very good. General partnership. You have a general partnership. And a limited partnership. And you folks didn't raise your hand when I asked you if you knew about this kind of stuff, but you do know about it. How about any more? Any other types of partnerships or corporations? Limited liability partnership. I'm just going to abbreviate that if that's okay. Okay, any other types? Okay, there's one more here called a limited liability limited partnership. And for corporations, I'm going to just mention two types that are different for tax purposes, and we will go ahead and also describe other types of corporations, but corporations for tax purposes are divided into C corporations and S corporations. Now if you write all of this down, you're half the way there in understanding the alphabet soup of different types of entities. There's two major differences among these entities that I'd like to discuss. The first is whether or not you actually have to file something with somebody like the state of Hawaii before you have such a type of business. For example, if to have a sole proprietorship, do you have to file something with any type of governmental entity before you have a sole proprietorship? You're shaking your head no. That's right. That you can just open your doors and start selling something out of your house. You can rent a store, start selling something out of the store. You can just go out and start selling your services. As a paralegal, you are a sole proprietorship. So, do you have to file something with the government? No. Now, partnerships, there are all these different kinds of partnerships. Do you think you have to file something with the government in order to have a general partnership? Or can you just go out and open your doors just like just like doing a sole proprietorship? Any guesses? You got a 50% chance of being right. What do you think? Do you think you have to file, Elizabeth, do you think you have to file something with the government to have a general partnership?
I think so.
Okay. You're partially right. Okay. First of all, to form one, the answer is no. But the state of Hawaii still says that if you have one, you must file a partnership registration statement with the government, but you still have a partnership. How about a limited liability partnership, Elizabeth? Do you think you have to file something with the government in order to have that? Give the same answer.
Yes.
Yes, you do. In order to have a limited liability partnership, you have to file something with the government. Because if you don't, you are not a limited liability partnership and you are a general partnership. So because a general partnership, a sole proprietorship is just an individual going out and doing business. A general partnership is two people going out and doing business. So if you go out and you think you have a limited liability partnership and you go out and do business with someone else, but you don't file anything with the government, you have a general partnership. If you do it by yourself, you can't have a partnership with just one person. So it has to be two persons. So the answer to this is yes. For all of the remainder, right down the line, in order to have one of these, you must file something with the government. And if you don't file something with the government, you're either going to have a general partnership if you have more than one person, or you'll have a sole proprietorship if you only have one person. So this is yes, 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 yes. C corporations and S corporations are classifications for tax purposes that in order to have an S corporation, you have to file something with the federal government for tax purposes. So these are just tax classifications that you should know about. What is the difference between these entities, the sole proprietorship, general partnership, where you don't file something with the government, and all of the others where you file something with the government? The main difference is in these words right here: limited liability partnership, limited partnership, limited liability, limited partnership, limited liability company, and a corporation. The main difference is that for these entities, the owners have vicarious liability for all of the liabilities of the business. So if you're a sole proprietor and your business incurs a liability, whether it be renting a space, buying something on credit, or running over somebody with your car, the owner is automatically liable. You have automatic vicarious liability. Can anybody give me any other examples of vicarious liability where you could be automatically liable for something even though you yourself didn't do anything? If you are a parent and your minor child incurs a liability, guess what? You're automatically liable for all the liabilities of your minor child. That is an example of vicarious liability. You don't have to do anything, but you will be automatically liable for the liability of your child. Another example is an employer. The employer of an employee is automatically liable or vicariously liable for the liabilities that are incurred by the employee in the course of the employee performing his or her duties. In a general partnership, each general partner is automatically liable or vicariously liable for the liabilities of the company. In all of these other entities, the owners are not automatically vicariously liable. So, vicarious liability, this is the vicarious liability of owners. No. No. I'm sorry. Yes. Yes. No. 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 So let's discuss what this term vicarious liability means, because it's important to understand. In the context of a business entity or a business, vicarious liability means that the owner is vicariously liable for the debts of the business. That doesn't mean that an owner cannot be liable. What it means is that they're not automatically liable. So, for example, In a corporation, the owners, the officers, and the directors are not automatically liable for the debts and liabilities of the corporation. But if the owner happens to be the president and is making all of the decisions for the corporation, and he makes a bad decision, say for example the corporation is operating a store, and there's a big hole in the middle of the store, and the owner, who also happens to be the president, says, nobody's ever going to fall into that hole. We got to stock these shelves. We got to attend to those customers. Just leave it there and we'll fix it in an hour. And in the meantime, a nearsighted person comes into the store, walks into the hole, falls down, and it gets injured. Then that owner who made that decision can be liable, and that's personal liability. That's not vicarious liability. That owner can be personally liable for the negligence in making that decision. So in all of these entities, if you have actual people who are making actual decisions, they're not never liable. They may be liable for personal liability, but they're not vicariously liable. So we're going to discuss in the various entities who may be vicariously liable and who may not be vicariously liable. I do have one exception here in the limited partnership. And the exception is yes, no. Because in a limited partnership, and we're going to discuss this in more detail later, in a limited partnership you have general partners and limited partners. In a limited partnership, the general partner is vicariously liable for the liabilities of the entity, but the limited partners are not. Does anybody have any questions so far? Okay. Of these types of entities, which do you think are the most common? That if you go out and you look at all the businesses that operate in Honolulu, which do you think are the most common? This one here?
LLC.
This one here?
Yeah.
Okay. For newly formed companies, when you have more than one person, this is very, very common. If I were to think about all the businesses that I formed within the last 10 years, I would say 90% of them would be limited liability companies. And even the ones that may be corporations, a lot of times they will form a limited liability company between corporations. So most of them are going to be limited liability companies. In addition to that, there are a lot of people who operate businesses that do not come in to see lawyers. And so there are a lot of sole proprietorships being formed where they have vicarious liability. But as we don't hear about them working in law offices because they never come in to see us, they just start selling. You know, you see them down at the swap meet. A lot of them are sole proprietorships or perhaps general partnerships. In the past, when they came to a law office to form a business, it was very common to form a corporation. So there are a lot of corporations that are operating out there, but most of those corporations were not formed within the last 10 years. They were formed well in the past. In addition to that, when you have a very large enterprise, like Coca-Cola, Ford, General Motors, Microsoft, Intel, they're all corporations. And the reason that they're corporations is that they have investors. And it's much easier to get investors and sell stock when you're a corporation than when you're a limited liability company. But for small businesses, limited liability companies, small closely held businesses, limited liability companies are the most common form of forming new businesses today. So, when you look at your materials, there's a lot of coverage of corporations, and we're going to go through that. But the reason that it's in there like that is that in the past, most people formed corporations, and then there were general partnerships and limited partnerships, and they started adding to the end of the chapter. But in fact, what you'll find is that most people today are going to form limited liability companies. Now, what are the things that people do when they decide to form a business? One of the things they do, as we mentioned, is that they file with the state of Hawaii.